Matthew 16, verse 24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And then from Paul's letter to the Philippians, where he says this, "I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in death, and so, somehow, to attain the resurrection from the dead." Thus far, the reading of God's Word. Now, we're going to open our sermon this morning. We'll try different things here. We're going to open with a video, and then we'll use that as a jumping point into the message. So if you don't mind.
Who are you not to be great? You, with the imagination of a brilliant child and the powers of an ancient god. Who are you to be ordinary? You, who can rescind life or raise the dead. Who are you to be afraid? You, who can serve as judge and jury while hoarding infinite lives. Who are you to be a slave to the past? You, who can travel time like the oceans and rewrite history with a single word. Who are you to be anonymous? You, whose name should be spoken in reverent tones or in terrified whispers. Who are you to deny greatness? If you would deny to yourself, you deny to the entire world. And we will not be denied.
So it's an ad for a video game company. Greatness awaits. And Sony knows what they are about when marketing their PlayStation video game consoles. Many men, especially young men, in today's society are, I put it mildly, are somewhat adrift. There are few cues these days that tell a man how to be a man. And today we're going to speak a lot, to men this morning, I think especially. But in fact, rather than getting guidance in our society today, much the opposite is the case. We hear a lot these days about toxic masculinity, as if just being a man, you are somehow a bad person. Everywhere you look, traditional male roles are maligned. How many movie and TV fathers are portrayed as dolts, dummies, and incompetents? Just watch. The next time you're watching TVs or shows, just about every man, every father you see on television, he's an idiot, a dummy, an incompetent who needs to be rescued, guided, and helped by their wives and children. And that's basically the image of a man that you have these days. Young men especially have few role models. If all the older men and father figures are dolts and dummies, who after all do you look up to? Really, it's a question. Who do you model yourself after if every older man is an idiot and a moron that needs to be helped through life by his children and his wife? Our society values youth, athletic ability, the young person, with a clever biting wit, a quick put down, fame for fame's sake, somebody who can rock Twitter, We have few heroic models of men. And then into this gap steps Sony with their sophisticated video games. They create a fantasy world for you, driven by hyper-masculine stereotypes and archetypes. Here you get to be the hero. It's not by accident. Greatness awaits you when you're playing video games. Everywhere else in life, they know their psychology. Here is a fantasy world where you can pretend to be the kind of great man that we all aspire to be. You can slay the dragon, rescue the maiden, get the gold. They know their psychology. They know how to make the games addictive. They know how to push all the right buttons, and for many, they're swallowed up by this alternate reality. After all, who wants to live in the real world? Where you always feel awkward, where you're not quite sure if you fit in, you don't maybe have athletic ability, you don't know how to talk to the girls, and you sense that something's wrong in the real world, that you don't quite fit in, and you want to escape. And here Sony provides you this whole world where you can be a hero, where you can be great. And so greatness awaits you. And this is not a message on the evil of video games. Just like alcohol, you can enjoy a beer and a glass of wine without abusing it, or you can get addicted and become an alcoholic. And heaven knows I've enjoyed one or two video games myself, and I've even got hooked on one or two, and had to sort of say, well, okay, that's enough of that for a while. But what I do want to talk about, and I want to use this idea that Sony is creating in their video games, this sort of notion of greatness awaits, to talk as best I can in the time that I have here this morning, to talk about what it means to be a man. Now, I hope that there's some content here that will resonate with women, but with all the talk about women's issues over the last couple of generations, one of my beliefs is that men, believe it or not, I think are in far deeper crisis than women. And a large part of this crisis is a spiritual crisis. We don't know how to be Christian men. Some of us don't even know how to be men, let alone Christian men. And the makers of video games, they profit from that crisis. And you ask yourself, why are superhero and comic book movies, the Marvel Universe, why are they so popular? Well, they speak to many of the deepest yearnings that us as men have. We want to be heroes. That's part of our wiring. So as followers of Jesus, how do we help our young men find their way? I think it begins with acknowledging that men and women are different. There's overlap and there's similarities, but there are real differences between men and women. Women tend to be more verbal, more comfortable with expressing and sharing emotion, and more likely to make moral decisions based on how it affects people and their relationships. Men are generally more spatial, more focused on things than on people. Men are less verbal. Men tend to make moral decisions based on whether things are right or wrong, regardless of how it affects people and relationships. Men are generally bigger, faster, stronger, and have more endurance than your typical woman. And men tend to do most of the jobs that involve being outdoors, that involve danger, that involve getting dirty, that involve building, making, and fixing things. And some of these differences are cultural, but most of it is just simply hardwired into us as men. This is just the way we are made by God. The interesting thing that has happened since the modern world, and especially the postmodern world, the rise of the information age, is that society has begun to devalue many of the traditional roles that men end up filling. So somehow you have a machinist on one hand and you have a social worker on the other. And in our society, it is infinitely better to be a social worker than a machinist. And you feel that sense of social status, that the social worker is higher up than the machinist. So it diminishes the sense of men to do to be a bricklayer versus being a teacher. That somehow the teacher has more worth than the bricklayer. And so men continually in the jobs that they feel like they want to do, to build things, make things, do things, get dirty, face danger, that they feel diminished in these roles because society is not valuing them. There are still some roles these days that are considered heroic. You know, like little boys, right? They want to become soldiers, police officers, firemen. There's few of these roles today. You know, if we talk about a man's spiritual path, in many ways, what has been lost to us as men is what we might call, and we'll use a fancy term for it, embodied manhood, or the idea of embodied spirituality. And what I mean is this: think of embodied spirituality in contrast to a more emotional spirituality, a more intangible spirituality. For example, over the last half century, there's been a lot of emphasis on praise music, praise and worship. Well, getting emotional over praise music is fine. There's been a real emphasis on prayer time and prayer groups. And these are all good and all, and heaven knows I've spent enough time trying to advocate that we should spend more time in prayer and that our worship needs to touch our emotions more. But for many men, and they often don't say it, but they feel it, that a lot of the movements in spiritual revival, worship revival, they're just not real enough. Again, men want to see it. They want to touch on it, bang on it, build it, and do it. So for men, the spirituality that connects tends to be something that is embodied, not disembodied. Something that is concrete rather than being emotional or intellectual. They want to be able to pick their spirituality up and handle it. It wants to be real, spatial. It has to be embodied. And this is where, believe it or not, the example of Jesus shows us the path to embodied spirituality. In this sense, if we look at the model of the hero, Jesus is the ultimate hero. Jesus is the man who sacrifices himself to save others. So Jesus is our hero. So if we're looking for a hero with whom to model ourselves, Jesus is the hero. Jesus is the one who, as we might say, mans up. And when God needs someone to step up and sacrifice himself, he steps up, goes the distance, and sacrifices himself. If you want to understand what it means to be a Christian man, it is right there for you on the cross. You commit yourself to sacrificing yourself and what you want for the good of other people. That's the essence, in many ways, of what it means to be a man. But it's more than that. It's about lifting your cross. It's about carrying burdens. Not for yourself necessarily, but for the sake of others. Carrying burdens not for your good, but for the good of other people. As a young man, let's think about that as younger men. Look around you and think about the other men that you look up to and admire. There is often one characteristic that makes many of these men admirable and worthy to look up to. Many of the men that you admire are men who shoulder burdens. They get up each and every day and they make sacrifices for others. We don't often talk about it, but we see it. They do it. Again, it's embodied. Often they are sacrificing momentary pleasures and enjoyments today, the thing that they most want to do, to shoulder a burden to make their future better. And the future that they're making better is not often their own future. They're making the future better for their families, for their wife, for their kids, for their communities, for their church. To follow Jesus as a man is to focus ourselves primarily on this reality of making sacrifices, of giving up something today to make a better future, to pick up our cross and to carry it. Giving up something I want to make the life of somebody else better. The best man, Jesus, sacrificed everything for you. Now it's your turn as a man to sacrifice yourself, to follow Jesus. That's what he asks. Take up your cross, lift that burden, follow me, and sacrifice yourself for the sake of others. Now, as we say it, this is really very, very countercultural. Today, everything is about me, my enjoyment, my toys, my needs, my wants, taking care of myself. What am I getting out of it? So what does it look like then to be a man, if we're going to paint a picture? Well, we're going to sketch a little bit, I think, and I think it's worthwhile to embody this and try to paint a picture in our minds of what it might look like. As a young man, what do you want to do when you get home today after church? Seriously. Play some ball, hang out with some buddies, watch some TV, play some video games. Now, I know Sunday is a day of rest, but in the spirit of sacrifice, why not start by doing something that your mom has been nagging you to do? Probably nagging you to do for weeks. I mean, seriously. Clean your room. Mow the lawn for your dad. Empty the dishwasher. Fold and put away your laundry. See, but here's the difference. That seems very mundane, and this is where we're talking about embodied spirituality. Now, this is, I think, where men have gotten lost over the years. Is we've disembodied our spirituality, and men get all adrift. So do these things, Clean your room, mow the lawn, empty the dishwasher, put away your laundry. But today, instead of resenting it, that your mom has to nag you to do it, turn your mind to the Lord, to God, to Jesus. Think about the cross and what Jesus sacrificed for you. And then with that thought, there was a whole bunch of things you wanted to do this afternoon. Sacrifice the afternoon that you were going to have. And in Jesus' name, go up and clean your room. Seriously. Pick up your cross. Seriously, you want to be a man? You want to follow in Jesus' footsteps? Don't make your mother nag you to clean your room or put away your dirty dishes or empty the dishwasher. Clear the table after dinner. Find ways to volunteer in your community. Sacrifice yourself to make the lives of your neighbors better. As you're older, go get a job. Put a plan in place for your life to get a job. University, college, trades, whatever. Sacrifice the fun you could be having today for a better future you could be having tomorrow. And I don't believe in all this nonsense, follow your passion. As a man, what you need to do is have a job. And I'll be honest, one of those things, and this is like this little secret, guys, young guys, this is one of the things that women find really attractive in this man is that they earn a living. Seriously. It sounds funny to say it, but in this day and age, you can't take anything for granted, right? But young ladies see a young man who is focused, work hard, applies himself, and sacrifices. They know deep in their heart that maybe he doesn't make the most amount of money, but they know that this is a kind of man that they can lean on and count on. Why? Because he gets up he could have things that he could be there playing his video games, sitting in his mother's basement in his pajamas, but he's out and he's got a job. And he's sacrificing what he wants to do for a better future. We move on from this, speaking of the ladies. In the old days, most men were married sometime between 15 and 18, and now you often have to wait until you're 22 or later. I know your hormones are raging, but being a man is not necessarily about what you want right now. Okay? It's not about sex, and it's not about hooking up. Set your mind today. Really set your mind as a sacrifice. Sacrifice the pleasure that you could be pursuing today for your future wife. I know we kind of chuckle, but I'm not a big fan of dating or getting out, making out, and doing all that. Largely because you're giving yourselves pieces away, but you're also, if you go out and date 15 girls and you're making out with them all, you've got all this amalgam of, she's better than her, and I like the way she kissed better than him. You get to your own wife, and now you've got all these women in the back of your mind rattling around. Comparisons that you make. Be friends. Get to know each other. Marry your best friend. Trust me, some of these things, it's like toothpaste. Once it's out of the tube, you sometimes don't learn these. So take it from a guy who's made a few mistakes along the way. That you're better off to keep the toothpaste in the tube. You'll thank me when you get to be 35 and you have a happy marriage, and the only woman that you know intimately is your wife. Seriously. Keep yourself pure. It will be hard, but no one said being a man was easy. I mean, look at Jesus. And for heaven's sake, don't fall into the trap of shacking up. Shacking up is perhaps the least manly way to enter into a long-term relationship that you can manage, okay? Other than just the living in sin aspect. And why is it the least manly? Well, because shacking up just sort of happens. There's no real commitment. We're just going to see how it works. When you live life perpetually, having in the back of your mind that you're going to see how it works, you're only there in that relationship as long as it works for you. There is no sacrifice. When you find the woman that you love, you need to commit. You need to make an active choice. You say to yourself, I am going to sacrifice and forsake all other options, all others. The language of the old vows is there for a reason because they understood some stuff. I'm going to forsake all others. I'm going to sacrifice all the other possibilities, all the other options for this one woman. And you need to leave your father and mother and shackle yourselves together. She needs to know that you will be there for her through thick and thin. She needs to know that you will sacrifice for her. I mean, how are you ever going to feel safe enough to really, tell the truth to each other, to really get in deep with each other, unless you make that active commitment that you will be bound to each other, that you will cling to each other and shackled to each other. You can't find true lasting love any other way. Love doesn't really happen until it requires some sacrifice on your part to love your wife. And that really is your role as a man. As a man, that's that Paul in Ephesians talks about that difference. Wives, respect your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. As a man, we crave respect from our wives, but you have to earn that respect. Sorry, it just doesn't get given naturally. You have to earn it. But your role is to love. Your role is to love your wife and make her feel loved and treasured. She has to feel as if to you, she is the most loved and treasured woman alive. And that means some sacrifice on your part. Seriously, love is not just feelings. Love is more about what you do, the efforts you make on your part, the sacrifices you make. And it's more than just about providing for her. So don't think that being off at the office and working and making good salary is the end all. Sometimes the thing you have to sacrifice is the ultimate arc of your career so you can be home loving your wife and your kids. What does Paul say? Love is patient, love is kind, it is not envy, it's not boastful, it's not proud, it's not rude, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, and it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. That is quite a list. Practicing that with your wife will involve more than a little sacrifice and more than a little effort on your part, but it can be done. There are many paths that you can go as a man, but if you sacrifice them to love your wife, what an amazing treasure that will be. And what a model it will be for your children. They'll see a man. It's so easy as a man to get wrapped up in thinking that we are owed something, that we are earned our rewards. And maybe we have, but that's what sacrifice is all about. And we can face these sacrifices head on, financially. Do you tithe? Do you sacrifice willingly and even joyfully for God's work in and through the community of believers? Are you giving up the rewards that you feel you've earned and that you deserve to support the work of God? Are you putting God ahead of your toys? And tithing and giving to God the first fruits is an issue of trust. Do you trust? And this is sort of embodied manly faith. Do you trust that God will provide? When you as a man sacrifice for the future, for your family, for the church community, do you trust that God will give you, that He will provide what you need? And not just financially, but also emotionally, relationship-wise, reputation, all of it. Do you believe that God will provide? This is what Paul is talking about when he talks about sharing in the sufferings of Christ. Not all of us have to be heroic missionaries like Paul, but all of us can make sacrifices. And when we sacrifice ourselves, something in us dies, often something that we want. Sex, money, toys, even just simple leisure time. But the trust we have is that sacrifice, practicing and living out Jesus' sacrifice in our lives is the necessary first step to living the resurrected life. It is through sacrifice and carrying the burden of the cross for others, losing the life that we want to have so that we might gain the life that Jesus has prepared for us. See, this doesn't stop when we get older. When we have an empty nest, we just don't one day stop sacrificing and go hit the golf course, go fishing or traveling all the time. The life of a man is sacrifice. And our young men need to see our older men sacrificing for them, for the family, for the community. In Revelation 21, God says to John, He says, "He who overcomes will inherit all of this, and I will be his God, and he will be my son." I struggled for a long time about this process, just because of the whole salvation works thing. What does it mean that he who overcomes will inherit all of this? But I think what it means and what God is communicating to John is just this process. This life of carrying burdens, of carrying the cross, of making sacrifices and doing it with the knowledge that I'm carrying these burdens and making these sacrifices because this is the path that Jesus laid out in front of me. He showed me the way, and I follow His path. I take up my cross, and I follow Him. I live a life of carrying burdens and sacrificing for the benefit of others because Jesus did that first for me. And speaking directly to us as men this morning, what better example of what it means to be a man that can we have than to look to Jesus as the best of all men, and in seeing Him that way, model our life after Him. To say, Jesus is my hero, and I'm going to be a hero like Jesus. I'm going to take up my cross and follow Him. Amen.